quite a lofty title, but what I take away from this is, how do we make everything that we're doing just a little bit better every day? How do we measure it, and how do we make those changes to make sure that we're delivering constantly better returns for the business? And this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I started off at Unilever as the fluffiest of fluffiest brand marketers, doing ads for brands like Dove and Persil and Surf, and I didn't understand numbers. In fact, I didn't care about numbers because it was all about the emotion. But over the past 10 years or so, working increasingly in brands that were direct-to-consumer, data-rich in telco and insurance, credit cards, and now working for an FX retailer, I've actually become a data geek, and an unashamed data geek. I love optimization. I love the opportunity to go in and play with the levers to see how we can improve performance, often to the annoyance of my team, who have to take me through and kind of suffer in silence. And one of my senior analysts is sitting here, who's nodding, because I love to get in and play with it. And I like where marketing is right now in relation to optimization. I love the opportunities that we have to improve, not just because it's important for me as a marketer to deliver return on investment, but also, honestly, it's about credibility for marketing. Because whilst I agree with everything that was said about the power of emotion from the last panel, my business doesn't give a shit about emotion. My business wants results. And so if I go in and talk to them about how I'm building long-term consideration, all they want to know is, how does this turn into money? And how are you constantly improving what we're doing every day? And that is where the language and the processes of optimization come in for me. It makes me more of a credible function in businesses that fundamentally don't get marketing or don't believe that it adds value, and in fact see it in many cases as the guys in the corner who do the ads who don't get the business, the coloring in team, which is what we shouldn't be. And I think back to where I started, particularly on that journey, in a world where all we had was broadcast channels. 2001, there was very little digital. There was DM, but not many people were using it that effectively, in my opinion. But we were looking at data and we were looking at results, none of which really related to each other, most of which were collected by people on street corners with clipboards asking you if you remembered if you saw an ad from Dove last week, which is ridiculous. And when you did get a campaign evaluation, it was 3 or 6 months after you'd actually done the thing, so there was no chance to improve what was in market. So if you flash forward to today, we're obviously in a much better position. But with all of this new opportunity, with all the new channels, with all the new data, we have a lot of things that we need to figure out. Anyone here been to DMXCO in Germany? Hands up. Good, a couple of people. So I've been doing digital marketing for a long time. I was one of the first people into Facebook. I've done some of the most sophisticated digital marketing from a targeted point of view, I think, that exists in the UK in different brands. I went to DMXCO last year thinking I knew what was going on, and I walked out thinking, shit, I know absolutely nothing. Because the number of people selling new capabilities, new platforms, new methodologies to manage marketing effectiveness and optimization blew my mind. And in that context, it's kind of hard to know what we as marketers are meant to do. There's only so many people who can tell me they're the world's leading video distribution network in one day and have me actually believe it. And so in that respect, what I'm trying to figure out as a marketer is, how do I optimize across channels in the right way? How do I make sense of all of the different complexity in the channels, the data? Who do I trust? There's a lot of stakeholder salesmen out there. Do I put my money with this person or this person? How do I make sense of the different models between outsourcing capability, insourcing capability? And then ultimately, to the point that was raised on the previous panel, what the hell am I optimizing for? Because too often I think as marketers, we're optimizing for things that, again, the business doesn't care about. Video views and clicks. Nobody cares about that. Are we optimizing for sales? Are we optimizing for financial performance? And those are questions I wrestle with every day. And I can honestly say I haven't got all the answers. And in fact, I don't think there are best practice answers out there. And I would just ask the clients, by show of hands, clients in the audience, do you think you've got it cracked? Anyone brave enough to say they have? No. Well, that's a great segue, because what that allows me to do is bring up my esteemed panel. Gentlemen, if you'd like to come and join me. So, joining me today, very lucky, we've got two heavy hitters in the world of media and marketing. So we have Dan McNicholas, who's with us, who is Head of Analytics and Insight at MEC. Had a long and illustrious career in MEC, but now is overseeing the function and essentially tries to make sense of all the different data points to try and optimize the media mix for MEC's clients. And we also have Chris Mawdsley, who's with us from the BBC, who's a media portfolio lead, worked in, again, a lot of media agencies, but now overseeing essentially all of the media mix for the BBC. Thank you for joining me, guys.
Thank you.
Say hello to the audience.
Hello.
Awesome. Good. So let's kick off with a really easy one. With all the things I've just talked about, the complexity, the challenge, trying to get your head around all the data, is there really best practice, or are we just, is this pie in the sky?
I'll start then.
Yeah, go on then. Hello. Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, hi there.
I think there's, in terms of best practice, there's not one answer that we could sit and say this is what everyone should do. I think when it comes to evaluation, it's about a suite of evaluation tools. So to start off with, before we do anything, are we clear on what the KPIs are? I think sort of tying into what you said earlier. Why are we doing that activity and how will we measure it? So, for example, if we're trying to build a brand, we're trying to change people's perception of a brand, we shouldn't be looking at click-through rates on day one as a measure of that. That's a response measure, not a brand building measure. So being really clear about what it is we're trying to do and what measures out of all the data available to us are the right ones to use to try and do that job. And then I think there's a suite of tools beyond there. So if I'm looking at a paid search campaign, I absolutely want to look at every impression we've delivered versus every sale click that could possibly be connected to that paid search campaign, and use all of that to make that campaign as optimized as possible. So whether it's creative, day part, and so on. So within a single medium, looking at the bigger picture. But then when we start adding things together, that's when this multi-channel effect becomes complicated. If we've got someone seeing a TV ad and then clicking on a paid search ad 2 minutes later, do we say that's TV or do we say it's paid search? It's sort of the wrong question, I think. What we need to do is understand how those different things are working together and what's really changing behaviour rather than just being there at the time that people do something. So also trying to factor in all those non-media factors that might have led to actually that person clicking and selling rather than just the thing that was immediately there.
So can you give us a real example of how you've done that? Because all that sounds great,
yeah.
But how do you do that, and who have you done it for?
So I think the best way of doing that is to pulling out what is each medium delivering, to what extent, how are they working together, what's the impact of non-media factors. The best methodology we've got for doing that is econometrics, and not all econometrics evaluations are equal, but a well-built, well-targeted, well-researched econometrics project that will allow us to understand, okay, if we spend on TV at this time of year and we support it with this medium and we do this somewhere else, that is going to give us the best overall picture. And that takes us beyond sort of the simple question of what does TV do to the more considered answer as to how does TV best contribute into a marketing mix.
So econometrics is a big subject, and in my experience tends to be pretty polarizing. So Chris, would you agree econometrics or some type of econometrics is the best way to do it?
We're in a quite unique position, I think, within the UK media space in terms of the fact that we've got a huge, vast estate of owned inventory, and that owned inventory obviously is all of the TV inventory, it's all of the radio airtime that we utilise for campaigns. What a lot of people don't also realise is there's a lot of digital inventory that within my team we look after as well. And all of those together, that's our kind of our own spaces. And for us, that's the starting point for everything we do. It's ensuring that we're using all of those own spaces and using all the best practice that everybody uses in commercial spaces to make sure we're getting the best of that. In terms of taking that forward into econometric modelling, that's not something that we've done yet. It's a bit of a tricky one for us because the vast majority of what we do is about driving consumption of content. And what we want to do is drive attributed consumption. So if somebody watches a 1 minute clip on social media, we like them to think that's come from the BBC. So econometrics is something that I think that we should be thinking about. But at the moment, as the vast majority of what we do is about getting people to watch stuff and click on stuff and listen to stuff, it's a little bit further down the line.
So to what extent is important to have, I suppose, the latest amazing whizzy tools and kind of software platforms to be able to make sense of all this data? Because, as I said, everybody is, I must get 20 emails a week from someone promising me the latest, greatest way to measure marketing. And all of it feels like a black box. So from your point of view, I suppose, let's start with you, Chris. What's the best tools, or what is the best tool?
Well, we've developed a bespoke tool with our agency, Havas, because we're conscious that I always use the same thing, but we're not flogging bleach. We've actually got stuff that people want to engage with. We've got stuff that people want to share and like, and some of the stuff is a bit of a badge of honour. And I think that because of that starting point, again, we're kind of in a bit of a unique position. So what we do is we obviously sweat all our owned inventory first, but we really struggle with what we term an underserved audience. Yeah. And underserved audiences are those people who are generally younger people who just still pay the license fee, but just don't get the benefit of somebody who's 65 who lives in Surrey, who listens and watches everything, versus somebody who obviously probably listens to a bit of Radio 1 and watches EastEnders, and that's kind of it. So what we try and do is ensure that any comms that we do to those underserved audiences go in all the right places, but the starting point of that has got to be within our owned. So we only spend money when we have to, and it's always an incredibly small amount of money. So we've developed a system called Quantum. These systems have always got fancy names. And the purpose of that is to try and model what we think is going to happen within, as a result of our owned and earned spaces, and then what we need to do to actually put paid on top of it. So we will look historically at data around a BBC Three comedy and try and work out, if that's a certain type of comedy, what sort of traction we think that will get without us spending any money. And then we'll look to try and model that and turn around and say, right, well, we don't have to spend money on this one because it's got key talent in it, it's a returning series, and lots of other bits and pieces in and around it. So we try and use that to kind of optimise our multi-channel approach.
And what about you? I mean, I suppose as an agency, you're in that somewhat difficult position of both having tools and trying to resell tools to clients. So where do you stand on it?
Yeah, we spend a lot of money every year on tools, whether that's building them ourselves or licensing from other people. And I think there's different tools for different jobs. I think anything that allows us to understand the challenge and the context that a client's KPIs sit against is a benefit. So an example is we work with one company called Talkwalker, who allow us to understand what people are saying every day about brands, not just on social media, which I think everyone does, but on TV, in newspapers, on the radio, in local press. So it gives us a much better idea of the conversations going on around our clients' brands, to give some context to advertising. So an example of that, we oversaw the launch of Great Western Rail when they rebranded from First Great Western. And it was only through really that tool and that research that we understood just how much negativity there was in literally the week leading up to that rebrand, because of the Rugby World Cup and the delays people were having on their service. I think without that, we wouldn't have known just what a low position from a brand perception point of view we were starting with when we went into that rebrand, than that allowed us to get. We use things like Hitwise and YouGov to get that competitor baseline information that will allow us to say, is 5 minutes on site good or not for a particular category, by looking at what other people have. So I think any of those tools that give us better background information, but I think there's a sort of note of caution that I'd say with all that is, I think, in sort of the world of big data and sort of the age of real-time evaluation and quick decision making, I think, as we heard in the panel session before, that short versus long term, I think there's a bit of I suppose a culture of big data being a panacea, and there'll be a tool for it. The data's there somewhere for us to make very quick decisions on very quick optimizations, and that's true to a point. But there's a big benefit a lot of the time in waiting and taking that longer term view and seeing what the long term value of a new acquisition is, or the long term impact of a campaign. So I think that the tools and systems that allow us to do that, and the methodologies that allow us to take the longer term view, are increasingly important and sometimes forgotten about, I think.
So who should own this then? Because I suppose cards on the table, in a world where I have masses of first-party data, which I can then link to lots of second-party data that I have myself, I don't rely on an agency for. And I don't like black boxes, someone else's solution telling me what the attribution score for a particular channel will be. And I want to see profitability of channels down to customer level profitability. I honestly don't see how I can outsource that to an agency at all anymore. In fact, I don't want to. I want to control that myself. So I suppose, where does that leave the media agency in helping to optimize the media if the client wants to take control of it?
I think in terms of the data that's needed to measure these things properly, as you've listed there, most of it sits with the client. Certainly most of it doesn't sit with the agency. What the stuff that sits with us is the pure delivery. What was your click-through rate? How many people saw your campaign? What sort of frequency and reach did you get? They're all important, but they're not the business measures that you're talking about. So absolutely, that data most naturally sits with clients. What we often find is where we've invested in those tools and dashboard systems and reporting methodologies, that often clients will be keen to push that burden onto us, if you like, and give that job to us. But certainly where you've got a client, as you've described there, who's keen to get involved themselves and is the owner of most of the data, then I think I have to be honest and say that would naturally sit on a client side.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our point of view, as you can imagine, we've got lots of people who look at data on a hourly, minute, daily basis. And I think that I would suggest, from our point of view, it's almost like a second and third pair of hands, really, or eyes on the situation, to try and give an external perspective, which I think is really important, because I think everybody in this room on a day-to-day basis kind of gets het up with their world. And I think for the way we use Havas is to try and trying to get their view on what the data tells them. And obviously we have our own views as well, and we come together and then we decide I'm right. So it's perfect.
I was going to ask you who makes the final decision, but you answered that for me, which is beautiful. Okay, great. So let's say we achieve what we need to achieve, and we all make sense of not the mess we're in, but the complexity that we're in. What's it going to look like in 3 to 5 years? What do you think the end state is for our capability around optimizing our channels?
I mean, from our point of view, there's been a lot going on at our place in terms of getting the back end of what we do absolutely up to speed. So probably most people here over the weekend voted on Strictly Come Dancing.
Hopefully not, but...
Oh, come on, admit it. Everyone,
it's not that kind of crowd.
You've always asked people to sign in to do that. Sign-in is now becoming mandatory, so come the beginning of January, every single person who goes onto the BBC will be a signed-in user, which basically just means it's a complete game changer for us in terms of what we can do in and around personalisation, in and around just proper sort of journey tracking across the BBC. We've got a few issues in terms of how organically things have kind of built up over the course of 10 years, and it's taken a good number of years to just get everything in one place to allow the organisation to have one sign-in, because there was 30 different systems all grown up organically. So for us, the next 3 years are all about making the best of that personalised world in terms of ensuring that we've got the right mix of what we need to do on a one-to-one basis, but also what we need to do in terms of making sure that people are still discovering things that the data might not tell us that they would want to discover. So for us, the next 3 years are all about, people talked about it quite a lot, testing and learning, lots of little things to ensure that we are on that journey. But it's going to be a brave new world for us.
Okay. And maybe, Dan, just a slightly adapted version of that question. Rather than kind of what you think it'll be like, what would you love it to be like? Looking across your client base, what would you love to be able to do?
Yeah, so I think what I would really like to see happen is probably less about the tech and more about how we approach the data that we've got and the measurement that we've got. I'm sure the tech will allow us to do things that we can't do at the moment, whether it's connecting offline and online media consumption or following better through from ad exposure through to sales. I hope that will happen, and that will be a great advantage in allowing us to do more with data. What I think I'd like to see is just a shift in the way that we use data and we look at results. So I was really encouraged by the debate last time about short-term versus long-term. I think that's a debate that I haven't heard enough historically, and I think it's really important. We know that our clients are under a lot of pressure to optimise from day one and to prove results after a week, after a month. So I'd like to see the conversation shift more towards lifetime value, repeat purchase, and that longer term view of the profitability of acquiring a new customer. So just changing the way we think about it really, and also just not using all the data that we've got because it's there. There's lots of data that tells us lots of things. Some of it isn't worth knowing, others is really valuable and might be a bit harder to get. And I think sort of fine-tuning our expectations so we look at the right data, not just the available data.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I think building on the previous panel, the thing that really excites me, I mean, I think there's far too much talk, particularly at conferences that are more focused on creative or ad agencies, around the dominance of the arithmocracy and maths, people with math skills taking over marketing. And I think if I think about where we could go, particularly if you are able to isolate individual consumers across platforms using persistent IDs that are common, then I can essentially assess whether someone saw my 60-second or 90-second brand ad and see whether they went and bought something. Because if I can do that, I'll buy 60-second ads all day long. But the problem is, as we all know, inherently has been the fact that it's impossible to optimize something that you have to wait 5 years to track. And that in itself causes you an issue, particularly in business where you're not really trusted with money, or businesses where you're not trusted with money because marketing is a cost center, not an investment center. So I think what you're saying there around how we use data and how we optimize, I think could change the game, not just in terms of direct response, but more broadly across the mix. Okay, so just very quickly, last question for both of you before we hand over to you guys, so get your questions ready. So if you were going to give brands one piece of advice around the things they need to avoid doing, or the mistakes that they need to try and watch out for, the pitfalls in terms of optimization, what would that one thing be?
I think from our point of view, it's get your tech sorted. I think it's worthwhile before you even start getting into this world that everything that you've got to allow you to do it is absolutely grounded in as much evidence-based fact as you can. Because if you haven't got kind of the support from above to everything that you're doing, things just take a lot longer. And then when you actually get to the end game, you maybe haven't got the trust in what the end game is telling you that you needed if you haven't got buy-in through the whole journey. Yeah. So I think we're fortunate in the fact that we have done that, and the point that we are getting to and the best practice that we've employed in getting to mandatory signing kind of means that the whole organisation will be talking about it for the years to come, I guess.
Okay. And yourself?
For me, it'd be don't jump too soon. We all want to see campaigns improve quickly, and there's a commercial pressure for results quickly, but where we can hold our nerve, let a campaign run, get more valid data, see it from a good pool of whether it's served impressions or days of TV campaigns or number of social media posts, wait until we've got that critical mass that we can make meaningful conclusions about what's working and what isn't, rather than sort of a knee-jerk, which is a lot more possible now with where you have people sitting and watching in real time how many people are on their website as a TV ad's going out. It's perfectly possible to do that now. Yeah. It's not necessarily the right thing to do if you want to make informed optimization. So don't act too quickly would be my number one, I think.
Good. So why don't we open up to the floor? Anyone in the audience got a question for the panel?
Hello, my name is Roy. I'm from Travelex. My question is because a lot of times I feel the multi-channel analysis insights is about to analyze what happened to get some clarity on what worked and what did not work. But a lot of times for a marketing analyst, we are trying to figure out what will work in the future. So say if we get everything worked out, we know exactly how the user journey is. They see the display campaign, then they search, then our paid search show them, they click through and buy. In that, it's still a very subjective judgment on what is more important. Is the display campaigns more important because if without it, people that particular person wouldn't see it, or whether the paid search is more important, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to find us. And also, if we show, say, like 20% of the users share that journey, does that mean we spend more on display, will increase the 20% to 25%? All these, to me, is rather subjective at the moment. My question being, like, is there any like objective way of analyzing what will happen in the future, whether that will be replicated in the future?
Yeah, if I can start on that, I think sort of you've alluded there to those sort of path to conversion models, which I always have an issue with, because it always assumes that just in the name of it, the path to conversion, that everything is leading you a bit closer to actually doing something, rather than you happen to be exposed to a lot of things and eventually you do something. Doesn't necessarily follow that they've all led you to it. And as an example of that, if we were to be unscrupulous and just serve all of your target audience millions and millions of completely useless display impressions, then sure enough, if we look at path to conversion, they'll be there. They'll have seen them. So you might conclude that they must have done something because they happened before you went and purchased and clicked, even if they're completely ineffective. So I do have a bit of an issue with that path to conversion, just assuming that everything must nudge us a little bit further, and whatever came last probably gets the biggest credit. That's why I don't really favour that sort of methodology. But to answer your question about backwards looking versus forward looking, I know it's a big fault of the alternative of econometrics, which I've advocated, that all right, that's great. You've told me what I should have done last year, given the media mix and media spend I got, but I'm not going to do that this year, so that's not very useful to me. It's annoying, if anything. And I think when we do econometrics, what we're looking at is, as well as looking backwards, building that sort of future planning tool based on what that tells us, so that we can, and our clients can take that tool and say, okay, well, if I spent more on TV, or if I took all my press activity out and put it in social media, based on what the past has told us, what would that do for the future? Right down to how many units would I expect to sell if the econometric analysis and the data we've got allows us to go to that depth. So I think it's an important point that things that just look backwards and say, oh, should have done a bit more of that, it's a bit useless. You need that future planning tool to plug into it to make it actually useful and forward-facing.
That tool being like a model, I believe. So from the past, all these, it's almost like a testing thing. So with different point of database, you sort of build a model and use that to look forward.
Yeah, it's powered by previous experience and looks forward. And with all of those models, the key to them is that we test them and continually refine them. So things change, markets change, brands change, media consumption changes. We need to make sure that we're not using a model from 5 years ago to say how you should spend or how you should phase your activity next year. That's not going to be very helpful. So the accuracy and the depth of the data is what's important there, and regular updates will make that useful.
Any other questions? Gentleman in the centre. Ideal place to sit for the microphone.
So my name's Luke Brown. I'm the CEO of Affinity, Australia's most awarded data-driven agency. We believe that data transparency between clients and agencies is the key to business growth. So this is a question for Dominic.
Okay.
I was interested in a comment that you said earlier that you wanted to control your first-party data. If you're not willing to share that with your agency partners and allow them to autonomously or independently optimise to what matters for your business, things like profit growth, how can they do that for you?
I suppose the distinction for me would be less about our willingness to share the insights. We're constrained around what we can share from a data point of view for regulatory reasons. I suppose the point for me is more, where does the insight emanate from? Historically, frankly, I would turn to the media agency and say, what's going on? And increasingly, over the years, was very dissatisfied by the insights I was getting, mostly because the insights were often self-serving. So to the point that was raised, display's doing really well for you on our conversion path analysis, buy more display. And I suppose what I'm more keen to do is say, right, if what I'm optimizing for is profitability or for revenue growth on this particular cohort of customers, how can the agency's view of the world help inform, and I think Chris was talking about this, inform my view of what's driving success for the business? It's not about creating a wall, it's just basically saying that my view of success supersedes your view of success. because my view of success is based on financial results rather than marketing KPIs. Does that answer your question? Cool, okay. Any other questions? Probably got time for one more. Gentleman at the back.
Hi, Joe from Creative Agency 101. I'd just be interested to get your thoughts on, as digital measurement and insight improves over the next few years, do you think that will have an effect on brands diverting marketing investment away from more traditional sort of brand building, things like TV and broadcasts in general, which things like the IPA Effectiveness Awards have shown tend to be pretty effective at building brands in the long term, but are harder to measure?
Do you want to take that?
We're in the fortunate position that our brand work doesn't really cost us anything. There's obviously an opportunity cost that we've got a certain amount of airtime, which we have to obviously prioritise across the business. But I think from our point of view, we're in an interesting world in the fact that the underserved audiences that I was talking about, their consumption of TV is going down and down with the BBC. And we're now getting to a point whereby even 3 or 4 years ago, we could fall back on a healthy consumption of our TV inventory to build the brand work because they were still watching television. We're now getting to a stage now whereby that consumption is getting so low that if we actually probably want to really shift the dial with younger audiences, then we will have to think about investing in brand comms away from the BBC on a more regular basis. But at the moment, they are fairly big conversations to have because we obviously have to make sure that everything we do is so accountable that to actually kind of justify spending lots of money on brand work in the current environment is a difficult conversation. It's not a conversation we won't have, but it's more difficult than in other organisations because we've obviously got TV to fall back on.
I think, unfortunately, that means we are out of time. Just want to thank you both for sharing your insights and offering so much substance. And I think that's you guys off for lunch. So thank you very much. Cheers, guys.